years of age and I live in Douglasdale. I'm paying 554 Rand a month for my 2022 Nissan Magnite.
Want a car insurance premium that'll blow your mind? SMS out to 30754 now for a quote. It's quick, it's easy, and it could save you hundreds of rands every month. Here's Amy.
To anyone who has not reached out to Outsurance, what are you doing? Reach out today.
Blow your mind, not your paycheck. SMS out to 30754 and see for yourself why Outsurance was voted Best Car Insurer 2023 by the Star and Pretoria newsreaders. Here's Yusuf.
It just shows that Outsurance is top of the tops when it comes to insurers.
SMS out to 30754 now. That's out to 30754. Outsurance is a licensed insurer and FSP. T's, C's, and limits apply. Premiums are risk profile dependent and reviewed annually. Client comments do not constitute financial advice.
Bafana Bastal remember what transpired in Lubumbashi when they went down by a goal to nil against the Ravens. They want to ensure their visitors walk away with sad faces when they meet in the final group stage contest. However, the DRC outfit are confident of another upset. This is the CAF Champions League. Catch Mamelodi Sundowns versus TP Mazembe on Saturday 2 March at 2:30 p.m. live on SABC1. Also available on SABC Plus and SABCSport.com. Hashtag We Love It Here. Proudly brought to you by SABC Sport.
For the love of the game.
Conversations that you connect with and react to. SAFM.
Well, last week in his budget speech, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana allocated 848 billion for the health sector, with 1 billion rand going to the National Health Insurance Fund. Earlier in the week, the Western Cape Premier described the impact that budget cuts are having in the operation of hospitals in his province as catastrophic. Doctors at Grooteskier are set to work under pressure, with many vacancies not being filled. This past weekend, the ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa gave a brief description on the state of health in the country and how he believes the NHI will help to fix the country's health problems.
We will continue to ensure that South Africans live long and they have healthy lives, and that all people, regardless of their income, receive quality health care. We will continue to overhaul our health system by continuing to invest in the building and maintenance of our hospitals, of our clinics, and our other health facilities, as well as providing relevant training for healthcare professionals. We will develop a single electronic health record that will enable a seamless experience for all users of public and private healthcare. We will, as I said, implement the National Health Insurance, and yes, the NHI will be implemented in phases, as it is an important project in the lives of our people.
All right, of course, then let's get into this conversation to look at how budget is affecting the ability of health facilities to provide services that people so desperately need. Let me invite onto the show Professor Alex van der Heever, who is an adjunct professor at the Wits School of Governance. Professor van der Heever, good morning.
Good morning.
Louis Boshoff is a campaign officer for health at AfriForum. Louis, good morning.
Good morning to you.
Matthew Parks is COSATU's acting spokesperson. Matthew, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having us. Good morning to the colleagues.
And Baxolisile Mali is provincial secretary for the National Education, Health and Allied Workers Union, which is NAHAU in the Western Cape. Baxolisile, good morning.
Good morning to you, Cathy, and your listeners at home.
Professor van der Heever, I'm going to kick it off with you. When we look at the medium-term expenditure framework, and this is, of course, over a number of years, and we look at a figure like 848 billion rand which is the allocation for health, it seems like there is a whole lot of money that is going to go towards the health department. But really, when we begin to unpack how that money is going to spend, when is going to be spent, and when these allocations are going to be made, of course, the picture changes quite significantly.
Well, there is a considerable amount of assets in the public sector and a very large number of employees. So the system is very, very large. And the allocations that are given might look very large, but the question really is whether they are showing an improvement year on year on the system that we have. All the evidence suggests that that's not the case, that we're actually effectively cutting the system in real terms, and the system is going to be under a lot of pressure. But the system is also under pressure due to systemic corruption in pretty much most of the provinces. And this is also revealed through massive irregular expenditure and unauthorized expenditure that occurs in most of these provinces, which has a direct impact on equipment, on facilities maintenance, and they've also got significant accruals. It means that they're a bad debt. Basically, they're not paying the bills, and this means that you end up with stockouts, etc. So there's massive mismanagement in the provincial health service as well. But so these systems are under stress due to both supply side constraints, the ability to actually fund the system at its current levels, the ability to improve on it, and the ability to actually maintain it, given the fact that in many cases the provincial administrations are subpar. They're actually very weak and in many cases incapable of properly managing the health service.
Louis, is it fair for us to say that we have seen declining spending when it comes to healthcare in the country over the last couple of years, and that is likely to be sustained going into the rest of 2024-2025 financial year?
Well, it depends on exactly what spending you're referring to. The short answer is no, the government hasn't been allocating less money towards healthcare as a whole, but the real spending, as in what money has actually reached healthcare service provision on ground level, that might have been declining, depending on the amount of corruption and depending on the amount of new doctors who's actually been employed. So yes, the short answer is no, not less spending if you define it in terms of budget allocation by government, but perhaps less spending if you are looking at how much money has actually reached ground level healthcare service provision.
Prof, can I get your view on that too? This idea of government spending less, that, and we hear it a lot in the context of what some describe as an austerity budget by government, and then departments being told to freeze certain posts because there simply is no budget to meet or to facilitate those posts being filled.
Yeah, so let's begin with the problem in the budgeting process. There's one thing which is the actual allocation of the funds, and there is the other is the cost structure of the system. If you've got salaries and wages that are increasing faster than the budget allocations can keep pace, then you're going to have a problem. Even with an increasing budget, you're going to be facing what appears to be austerity. You're going to be having to cut posts. The health budget, 65% of the health budget is going to be salaries and wages. And that means that if you're having a cost impulse on that side, that's the part you have to cut down the line in order to prevent the rest of the expenditure being crowded out, which you need. You're on consumables, you need it on equipment, you need it on maintenance. And basically when the ratios go out of kilter, then your health system suffers in other ways. What's happening at the moment is that we had a very big salary increase that was passed through on government, and national government failed to fully finance the budget increase, the salary and wage increases that happened during the 2023-2024 financial year. This has happened on many occasions, in fact. And this imbalance causes a shock in what are in many cases quite poorly managed departments. And then they basically are taking some sort of evasive action, which usually results in freezing of posts, freezing of maintenance expenditure, non-payment of bills, etc. So the problem is the shocks. And then on the long term, the question is whether or not the system is properly managed in keeping pace. In other words, the allocations keep pace with a growing and deepening capability of the health system in accordance with some kind of strategic plan. Now that just hasn't happened. So so what we're seeing now is the outcome of a short-term constraint, but we've also got the problem that government finance is under huge pressure because basically government has basically shocked the economy into a form of recession. The failure of Eskom, of Transnet, of our logistics systems has basically taken economic growth into negative levels, and what that has done is reduced government's revenues because it depends on economic growth in order to be able to finance the budget. So now we're sitting with many complications. It's getting very complicated to manage the consequences of all of this. Corruption in the state, corruption that results in economic growth going into decline, government finances going into decline, and then this basically starting to hit our public services and delivery when they're also quite poorly managed, and they can't really take very severe shocks. So it's becoming very complex.
But Xolisile, when we listen to what the Western Cape Premier Alan Winde had to say in his State of the Province address last week, of course he didn't mince his words when he described the kind of challenges that they're facing as a province as a result of what he described as budget cuts, particularly within the health sector. So as Nahau in the Western Cape, do you feel that there have been budget cuts to health spending?
No, Cathy, look, from where we're seated, we do think that there is some truthfulness in terms of the austerity measures being applied by National Treasury. But we equally think that as a union, we have all the time have raised quite a number of issues about why we believe that the decision to go on a route of austerity, proposed austerity measures by NT was not well thought of in consideration of the issue of vacancy rate, civil servants being overworked and civil servants being underpaid. But on the other side, we do think that the Premier doesn't want to take some blame into the crisis that we are faced with in Western Cape. For instance, not everything has to do with austerity per se in Western Cape. There are some challenges that relate to issues of poor planning on their side, a skewed allocation of resources to substructures. For instance, Western Cape can still justify that it took a decision in 2014 to demolish what is called Joster Hospital at that time. And then it planned then to build a new hospital, but until today, the 24 million which was allocated by National Treasury has not been utilized. Maybe it's because the area in which it was to be built on is not really where the DA is benefiting in terms of voters. But the second thing is that, yes, there is truth as well that when there were these proposed cuts, when National Treasurer had decided that on a basis of what would have been signed in the PSCPC in terms of salary increase, which Prof is saying was actually a high increase, which is where we disagree, because there was no really high increase here, because the only difference from what workers used to get on, or what would have been budgeted for in the financial 2022 and 2023 was actually a difference of 3.2. So if one then argues that that is actually a huge salary increase, we don't know what is the meaning of it. But as a result of that, you have the Western Cape trying to intervene and manage the fact that the 3.2% was not actually budgeted for by National Treasury. And as it does that, it allocates too much resources on the areas where their supporters are. For instance, in the northern substructure and the southern substructure, they remain well funded. But if you go to areas like your Khayelitsha or eastern substructure, those institutions, they remain under funded. As a result, the Khayelitsha area had, for it to sustain the 3.2 increase, had to borrow money from the Mitchell's Plain substructure, which tells you that there is actually the question of poor planning in dealing with this crisis of austerity measures. So we do believe that DA partly is correct, the Premier, but equally we do believe that the Premier is crying in a wrong funeral, because it has been them who have been arguing publicly that the crisis in South Africa, for you to address the issues of money, you need to reduce the public sector wage bill by cutting half the people who are employed there. And as a result, whilst you are having two long queues, you have a ratio of nurses vis-a-vis a patient being high, and the government, because of its failure to budget for 3.2, is giving you what we have wanted to see by cutting half the public servants. We are now getting on top of the mountain because there are elections coming and wanting to shoulder blame and not taking it to the fact that it's actually what we have wanted in the first instance. So partly we agree, but partly we believe that also the provincial government should shoulder some blame in this regard. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Thanks for that, Baxolisile. In a moment, we'll also hear from COSATU's Matthew Parks when we continue the conversation. It's edging towards 10:30. It's time for your latest news update.
Thanks, Cathy. Good morning. With the news headlines, Kemudupi Makhalemele. A resident of Sanford in Phoenix, north of Durban, has been shot dead in an alleged drive-by shooting incident. Police in Makapanstad in the northwest say 7 suspects arrested at the weekend in connection with the killing of Solomon Moapani will appear in the Themba Magistrates Court today. And the International Court of Justice will today host the final hearings in a case looking at the legal consequences arising from Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories. Details of these and other stories at 11.
Taking a look at your markets this morning, the rand is currently trading at 19 rand 32 to the dollar, 24 rand 48 to the pound, and 20 rand 92 to the euro. Markets in Asia close mainly weaker. The JSE is lower in mid-morning trade. Markets in Europe are flat this hour. Gold is trading at $2,035, platinum $895 per ounce. The price of Brent crude oil is at $81.10 a barrel.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
We continue the conversation on the Talking Point. We're looking at the health department, and not that the health department, but rather the state of healthcare. We're asking the question around whether or not what are perceived cuts to health spending are having an impact on service delivery. Professor Alex van der Heever is an adjunct professor at Wits School of Business. Louis Boshoff, campaign officer for health at AfriForum. Matthew Parks is COSATU's acting spokesperson, and Baxolisile Mali is with Nehau. Matthew, let me give you a chance to come in here as COSATU. Do you perceive the changes as being health cuts? Or as being spending cuts, rather?
Good morning. Yeah, thanks for having us. Look, so yes, they are. If you look at the allocations in the budget tabled at Parliament last week, the allocations for health for the next year, for the next 3 years, are below inflation. So once you take inflation into account, then in real terms, yes, it's a mathematical fact. It is a cut. And of course, at the same time, often medical inflation tends to be higher than general inflation. You must also take into account that population grows. So, there's multiple pressures on one side, from different sides, but the net result is that we're putting the public health care under even greater pressure. But I think also we shouldn't forget that the national health insurance is not only about public health care, which is overstretched, it's extremely overburdened, under severe pressure, and caters for, 84% of society roughly, but also about the private medical industry as well, which has a similar budget, but caters for about 16% of society, but also is having huge challenges too. So I think the idea is how do we combine resources to appreciate the fiscal space of government is always going to be under severe pressure, given our many, many socio-economic challenges. But it's about how do we pull resources together in a much smarter way, which can really fundamentally shift us from being a society where many people die of easily identifiable, preventable, manageable, curable diseases. For example, Cape Town should not be a tuberculosis capital of the world, given the resources we have at space, given the amount of technology, but it's about how do we pull things together in a much smarter way.
When you think about the impact that this is having on service delivery within the health sector, Matthew, where would you say the biggest impact is being felt right now?
I mean, the biggest impact right now is felt in our public hospitals, our day hospitals, where patients, whether it's in Cape Town, at a Heidelberg, whether it's in Soweto or Chris Hani Baragwanath, literally have to get to the hospital by 4 in the morning, hoping to be seen by the afternoon. And it's not because the nurses, the doctors don't want to assist, they do. But the number of vacancies there is so huge. The amount of demand is so great because most South Africans simply can never afford medical aid given how extremely expensive it is. So that's the number one issue. Then, of course, if you have one nurse performing the job of what should have been 2 or 3 nurses, or if you have a doctor working a 48-hour shift, then, of course, the staff are going to be burned out. And then what you find happens is that medical staff, whether it's paramedics or nurses, doctors, and so forth, are specialized professionals. Their skills are highly sought after, not only in the private sector here in South Africa, but even overseas. So it's very easy for the private sector or countries overseas to say, well, we'll offer you a far better salary, far less strenuous conditions. And this is why you're seeing a real brain drain from the public healthcare institution. But not just that, you're seeing an increase significantly. You now find a situation where doctors who go through our universities, which are public universities, are heavily subsidized by taxpayers. They do the community service, and literally the Saturday morning they're done with community service, they're on a flight to London or Dubai, Australia, Canada, etc. So the point is, I think right now, if we're shortchanging ourselves, that we need to be much smarter about where do we invest. But clearly, health is a necessity. There's impact upon the economy because if workers can't get adequate health treatment, they're not productive at the workplace, they're constantly sick. Many workers then won't receive their salary, the family suffers. Workers are dying prematurely. There's an impact on the economy of lost skills. And of course, when the state has to pick up the bill from people who get treatment for something that should have been dealt with primary health care, there's a drain on the fiscus too. So right now, on whatever angle you look at it, things are not working, both public and private.
Louis, when you characterize the problems in the healthcare sector, especially from the point of AfriForum, what do you identify as being some of the weaknesses in the system that ultimately are leading to the kind of experiences that patients have? Because when a patient goes to a health facility, the expectation is to receive a service. And when they're unable to receive that service, then it suggests that something has broken down. But what do we understand? What exactly in the system needs to be fixed?
Well, the main problems that AfriForum has been highlighting all the time, or let me make 2 statements about that. The first would be that the state of healthcare in the country cannot be separated from the state of the economy. So what's happening is, what's actually happening is that there's something wrong with the economy, and then the government is pointing to the system and saying the system has broken, when actually the economy has broken. And so giving a new, or designing a new system and giving it a new name will not be able to fix economic growth, which is required for increased healthcare provision. And then secondly, which ties onto this, is that there's too much focus on the distribution of healthcare and not enough focus on creating more healthcare services or creating the environment where more healthcare services will be delivered. And these two are all the time being ignored and simply saying, what if we design a new system or allocate a bit more budget to this end of the system or whatever. And all of this will make only very little tiny differences, while what is needed is to state it this way: instead of doctors leaving the country, we need to create economic growth to such an extent that doctors from other countries would rather say, we would like to go to South Africa where there is money for healthcare, for salaries. And so, yeah, that's in broad terms the basic problems we're seeing from government side.
Prof. van der Heever, just building on what Louis has said, that on the one hand, we not only have young people that are trained, subsidized by taxpayers, but they come back home and don't have jobs. And yet every day we're told about how there isn't enough capacity at our health facilities. We have nurses that are leaving the country, but at the same time, we're told that in some provinces, like the Western Cape, workers, nurses are having to cut down on overtime because there isn't budget for them to actually receive payment for working those extra shifts. Is there a uniform way of characterizing the problems that our health sector is facing, or does it need to be looked at per province, what is happening?
Yeah, so you do have to look at it per province in some respects, and you also have to look at features of the national system, because there's things that the provinces can control and there's things they can't that are being done by national. So as I pointed out, the personnel costs are actually being determined at the national level. And in this last year, it came through as a shock, because if government does increase salaries more than they're allocating for budget, national is also allocating the funds to the provinces for provincial health services. So there's provinces don't raise their own taxes. There's a process of raising taxes nationally and unconditionally and conditionally allocating funds back to the provinces for its major functions that are allocated in terms of the Constitution. Now, what happens there is that the two national features of this, which is the budget and the costs of the health service, are actually out of the control of the province. Now, that is something that a sensible government would control. And this results in mismatches where the budgets that are allocated and the costs of the services actually differ, are varied during the financial year. Now, it was pointed out that sort of a 3.2% real increase was allocated that the province should theoretically have absorbed. That's absolute nonsense. The provinces don't have additional funds. They've allocated the full amount. And a province like the Western Cape is actually relatively sensible in the way it plans its budgets. It doesn't approve posts more than what it's got funds for, whereas a lot of the other provinces are actually just are not managing the salary and personnel budget very efficiently. They allow for more posts to be approved than they actually have funds for. So when the calculation goes out, they're in financial difficulties immediately. So their government basically shouldn't be approving salary increases that they don't fund. That's national's responsibility. At the provincial level, the planning needs to be good. And there's a lot of money being wasted in many provinces. So if you had to look at the Eastern Cape, over a period of about 7 years, more than half its non-personnel budget falls into categories like irregular expenditure, accruals, fruitless and wasteful expenditure, and unauthorized expenditure. That means all the discretionary money they have outside of salaries and wages is also being squandered. And in places like the Northern Cape, it goes over 60%. This is an average for 7 years. This is a level of unbelievable mismanagement. And provinces like Gauteng are at about 35%. And all of those are really scary numbers, because it means that you can increase budgets in these provinces as well, and the money will just disappear. So that's the provincial level problem. Provincial level problem is about governance. It's about how well the province is actually doing its job. And national can make that job difficult, but a well-functioning province can probably still compensate to some degree and also fight back and pressure. So Alan Windey going back and saying there's something wrong with what you're doing here is the right thing to do for a province when national government basically stuffs up. And that needs to be something that is proactive, continuous, because a large part of managing a province is also engaging with national on stuff they do wrong. You have to do that. But at the provincial level, you must take responsibility for what you're doing and manage it as best as possible.
Matthew, why do we see such little accountability when it comes to holding the provincial governments accountable? One just has to go back to the Babita Deokaran matter, because what her assassination resulted in was quite a number of exposés that actually unraveled corruption within the health system and related to particular hospitals. And it is hundreds of millions of rands that these hospitals are getting to provide services. But, we know now that some of that money was used to buy genes and all sorts of other things that should not ordinarily be forming part of a hospital's inventory or even, acquisition under any circumstance. And when we think about just that and replicating it across the country, given what some of the other guests have said about how widespread this corruption is, why is there such little accountability?
Yeah, look, I think it's a good question. And, perhaps it's partly because our democracy, though it's 30 years old, is still in its infant stages, if one could say it like that. People tend to assume that, the Minister of Finance, he presents a budget and that's it. It's whatever it's contained there will be spent, etc., etc. People tend to focus on national leadership, etc. Provinces also don't have a huge amount of powers. They really have, as Alex was saying, more expenditure capacity. And if you look at them, actually, they have a real significant expenditure capacity. They deal with significant chunks of national departments, often in a far greater way, from health to education, social services, public works and transport, housing, etc. I think also part of the quality of people, political parties send to the provinces often at times is not the greatest that you would hope for. But I think there has been, efforts by some to hold provincial and municipal governments to also accountable. Our municipal governments is often far, far worse than what you see in the provincial governments. I know, for example, if I look in the Kosatu stable, Nahau, Denosa, many other unions would regularly put pressure on the provincial departments of health, would actually go to the issue of a hospital, what are the issues at the hospital itself. So I think there is an evolution. I think people are trying to hold them accountable. But I think you're right. It's something that needs to be done much more systematically. I also don't think it necessarily Parliament itself is innocent, because at times you can see in the Auditor General's reports a horror show in provincial departments or municipalities across the country. And at times the relevant committees of Parliament don't really hold them sufficiently accountable. The AG has been flagging it. But really we have to do far better, because national government, to a large extent, is much better off. The weak links tend to be at a provincial and municipal level. But if you don't do the rot there, by the time it gets national, it'll be very, very difficult to turn things around.
But Xolisile, why is it so difficult for organizations, for unions like yourselves to be holding provincial governments accountable, especially where we have the kind of wide-scale corruption that we see?
Okay. No. We don't really think that when it comes to trade unions, at least in our space, it is difficult for us to hold a government accountable on corruption. But at times, of course, people, it's not just an easy thing that you can just pick up. But indeed, where there have been instances where we have realized that there's some acts of corruption, we have always been vocal on those issues, and at times raising it to the necessary entities that will be tackling such things. At times,
and why is it hard to pick up what Polisile? And I go back to that example I made around Tembisa Hospital and Babita Diokoran, that when you look at the level of corruption that was allegedly taking place, it's difficult to see how monies, those big sums of money spent procuring goods that a hospital doesn't even need, would go unnoticed by, everybody in a department or even by the hospital personnel. So on the one hand, I want to say, yes, maybe it's going unnoticed. On the other hand, of course, I'm thinking people conveniently turn a blind eye.
No, definitely. You see, the challenge that we have, the level of lawlessness in our country, at times make it difficult for even the same employees who might be involved in issues like your bid committee to quickly expose these acts, because one day when they expose, they get their lives to be in a serious danger. And our difficulty with these things as trade unions is that the labor relations space doesn't really allow, even the PFMA itself doesn't allow a space where trade unions will also be part and parcel of these bid processes for purposes of ensuring that there's transparency on issues and so on. So as a result, this information will actually come after the incidents that have taken place, either through people hiding themselves when they try to expose these things because they are fearful of their lives. So the issue of exposure of corruption is not really an easy thing if you consider that many people get to be killed for mere fact of exposing corruption.
Let me go to our phone lines. Lihle, you're calling us from the East Rand. Good morning.
Good morning, Cathy. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you for calling in.
I think what we need to understand is that at a local level, healthcare workers are really suffering, because even if a healthcare member is being, a healthcare worker is on incapacity leave, the Department of Health doesn't even send a temporal person to actually alleviate the burden at work. And also there's a moratorium in all provinces. And when you look at the outcomes of young women with CA cervix in most provinces, they can't really access services. Most regional hospitals don't even have radiologists. They don't even have urologists. They don't even have, it's actually sad to look at. We can see a person today and diagnose them and do everything and find out that they really have curable cancer. But due to the bottlenecks in sending them to tertiary care for that service, they might end up losing their lives while waiting. So, and also we are training for other countries, because where I work right now, most nurses are leaving for Saudi Arabia due to being overworked. Not because they want better pay, but they are so fed up with the system, because nothing ever changes. If somebody dies or somebody goes on retirement, there are just no replacements.
And Lihle, when you try and have these issues addressed, what kind of response do you get? So whether it's within just the hospital where you work, what kind of reception is there to the issues? Because I imagine management at that facility is not blind to the issues. They can see that there's a problem.
Basically, they're going to tell you that there's a moratorium from province that they cannot employ people, So you're going to end up losing more people than the ones you're putting into the system as healthcare workers. But we have a growing population of section-based.
How does all of this make you feel, Lihle, as a doctor?
Basically, you do what you can, but it's really, really frustrating, because most people, they do stand a chance of surviving their illnesses. But unfortunately, if you send to a regional hospital, they do have the CT scan machine, but they don't have a radiologist, because there's no money to employ a radiologist. In most provinces, just to get a urologist, you have to send to a tertiary hospital that accommodates the whole province. Can you imagine?
The backlog.
And I think there was also an article that was done about another province. I think it was Northwest that only had one oncologist, and they were sending their patients to Johannesburg.
Yeah, sure.
So we're dealing with endemic problems, and there's absolutely no political will to address them.
Lihle, thank you for calling in and for raising those issues with us. She's a doctor out in the East Rand. Tulani, good morning.
Morning, Cathy. It's Tulani Dasan Petang. Cathy, the DA in the Western Cape is not perfect, and it is the first to admit that, but it is in a different league from the other 8 provinces governed by the ruling party. When held up to other 8 provinces, the Western Cape is a model of good governance, clean audits, and austerity agendas second to none. Massive progress in health, which is the primary measurement of provincial competence. This Bakoli from Nehau must stop these cheap politics, while the budget cuts will negatively affect the poorest of the poor, whom he claimed to represent in Nehau. He must deal with the root causes of these budget cuts, which has been years of ANC corruption. He must also talk, when he meets with his comrades, he must talk about the increasing VIP budget of 1.4 billion, which could be placed in improving the healthcare system, and also these budget cuts that we are talking about today. And Cathy must also know that the Western Cape is a victim of its own successes, because people are taking their parents and grandparents here to the Western Cape on a daily basis to get quality healthcare because of failing health system in the Eastern Cape and other 8 provinces that are led by the ANC crooks.
Okay, all right.
This is a current call to all South Africans to vote out this corrupt government that is aided by Nehau and the Tripartite Alliance.
All right, Tulani, we're going to leave it there. Tulani is out in Khayelitsha. Dumile, good morning.
Good morning, Cathy and your panel.
Yes.
I think my point is a simple one, is to say, look, with health first is a state of mind. If your state of mind is not proper, there's definitely no way your health is going to be all right. Now, where I'm going with that is that, there was a doctor in the U.S. called Dr. Sebi. I think he was somehow killed there, because he had figured out that if you want to be healthy, your body has to be in an alkaline state of balance. Now, what happens is health is an industry. It's a business. We have to admit that. And for an industry to exist, it has got to be problems that it has to solve continuously. So if people are perpetually kept in an unbalanced state of pH in their own systems, most definitely you're going to have more sicknesses. And there's no way, no matter how much money you can throw into the system,
all right,
but there's no way you're going to be able to accommodate all the illnesses that are going to come unless people just live healthy. Alkaline state of mind is the proper way.
All right.
Let's leave the alkaline. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's probably a conversation on the other side of what we're talking about today. Because that's what should happen. To prevent you from falling ill. But when you are ill and you need access to healthcare facilities, you expect that those should be functional. Let me then get ready to close off our conversation. So where to from here? What then can we realistically anticipate when it comes to the provision of healthcare in our public healthcare sector, whether it is primary, whether it is secondary healthcare? But Xolisile, I'm going to give you your minute just to give your final reflections. Where to from now, really? Can we expect things to get better?
No, thanks, Cathy. Before we respond to that, we want to indicate that indeed there's a say that you can take a horse to the river, but you can't force the horse to drink water. There's an indication that despite us as Nehau affording the likes of Tulani free education, he's refusing to arise to logic. And we are saying it can't be cheap politics when we're raising the issue of the failure to provide healthcare services by the Western Cape government. For instance, there's a long-known story about patients sleeping on floor in Khayelitsha District Hospital, but that Western Cape government is claimed to be doing worse, better. EMS workers are subjected to wear bulletproofs for them to be safe, yet we are told that government is doing quite good. from where we're seated, we think, coming to what you are raising, we do think that the solution to the crisis that we're finding ourselves into is on a question of the implementation of NHI and ensuring that indeed resources are well allocated to that scheme for greater access to healthcare, not only for us in the Western Cape, in town or suburb areas, but for rural communities. And that will assist us to actually ensure that workers and the working class in general is not subjected to the extortion by the private health sector, where you have the two-tier healthcare system. So we want more resources to be placed in that regard.
All
and
right.
we do believe that with Treasury putting its more resources in that regard, the healthcare system could improve for the betterment of our people. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for that. Matthew?
Yeah, look, I think for us, the key thing is that we're in a crisis, both public and private. Public is overstretched, struggling to deliver. The private is unaffordable, yet has, quality, but underutilized. And I think, as a consequence, we're paying the price. People are dying when they shouldn't be dying. People are sick when they should be at work. So I think for us, it's about how do we pull the two together. It's not going to be an overnight journey. The NHI gives a common, sound platform to do so. It's been, successfully implemented in many countries, from Canada to Sweden, Singapore, etc. Obviously, we have to have our own unique model. But I think for us, it's about the president signing the NHI bill, and of course, making sure you do put adequate resources there. It will take some time, and I don't think, perhaps one doesn't want to rush, but they have to move with some speed, because we shouldn't be allowing people to die for no valid reason.
All right, Matthew, thanks for that. Louis?
Well, aside from getting rid of the ruling party, we would suggest strengthening the private sector, where we find less corruption in initiatives such as Unjani clinics and many other private initiatives also aimed at low-income communities, and strengthening those initiatives, and also allowing for low-cost benefit options, which we see government still kicking against this, which can actually help poor people. And then also enacting business-friendly policies, which will increase the tax base and in the end also increase income available for public healthcare spending. Yes, so that would be in short my 1 minute answer.
All right, thanks for that. Prof. van der Heever?
I'm actually quite worried about the next few years. The NHI is unfortunately just a political pipe dream. It's not going to happen, and it can't make it can't make a significant difference. It hasn't been thought through. Structurally, can't be implemented. Fiscally, can't be implemented. We're left with the failing governance structures that we have in the provinces, which can be corrected. But if we had to use the case of Babita Deokaran as an example, that roughly 1.2 billion rands worth of transactions that had been flagged in Tembisa Hospital, it's unlikely that many of the items that were to be purchased and transactions that were approved and paid for actually resulted in something arriving at the hospital. And to date, nobody in the province has been held to account. And in relation to the unions, they were also part of objecting to the suspension of the CEO who signed off on those transactions. The corruption goes very deep in these provinces, and what it indicates is that it goes right up to the top, and that's why nothing has happened to follow up on those cases and to close the holes in the, let's say, just using the Gauteng Department of Health as the example. This is going to continue, and it's squandering public resources hand over fist, and it means you can't basically get the system to adjust correctly unless you deal with the corruption that goes right to the top. Unfortunately, that is the case. NHI can't correct this, and really is an unimplementable piece of nonsense as it stands.
All right. We'll have to leave it there. Let me thank all of my guests for coming onto the show and contributing to the conversation. It's just after 11 o'clock. It's time for your latest news.
Independent and impartial. This is SAFM News.
Top stories at 11 o'clock. The Phoenix resident gunned down, and the ICJ holds final hearings on Israel. A very good morning to you. Investigations are underway following the shooting death of a resident of Sanford in Phoenix in the north of Durban. 52-year-old Mohammed Abed Adham was shot dead in an alleged drive-by shooting on Friday. Police are also probing the motive for the shooting. Gareth Naidu from KZN VIP Protection Services says Adham succumbed to his injuries on the scene despite emergency medical intervention.
On the date in question, KZN VIP received multiple calls reporting a shooting incident on Avon Ford in Sanford, Phoenix. Security and medical teams were dispatched to the scene, where one person sustained multiple gunshot wounds. Paramedics attempted to stabilize the victim for approximately an hour. Sadly, the person was declared deceased due to the nature of the injuries.
Police in Makapanstad in the northwest say 7 suspects arrested at the weekend in connection with the killing of Solomon Muapane will appear in the Themba Magistrates Court soon. Muapane was reported missing last Sunday. Police say the victim and his friend reportedly had a quarrel with the suspects at a tavern in Maubane the night before he was reported missing. The suspects reportedly assaulted his friend at the same tavern after Muapane had left and put him in the boot of a car. He managed to escape, however. Muapane's vehicle was found burnt out in the bushes. Police spokesperson Amanda Funani says the suspects are facing charges including murder, kidnapping, and malicious damage to property.
On Monday, 19 February 2022, one suspect was traced and arrested, and he appeared in court on Wednesday, 20 February 2024. On Wednesday, 2 more suspects were arrested, and Friday, 23 February 2024, 3 more suspects were arrested, and the missing person docket was changed to murder. The victim's decomposed body was found buried in a shallow grave on top of another grave in the cemetery.
The 52-year-old man accused of raping his 7-year-old granddaughter is expected to appear before the magistrates in Bushbuck Ridge in Mpumalanga. The accused will continue his bid to be granted bail. The grandfather was apprehended after the victim and her mother had a conversation about molestation. It's reported that the victim opened up about her ordeal after her mom said that victims of molestation must report it. President Cyril Ramaphosa says the 2024 budget shows that the country is heading in the right direction. This after Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana delivered the budget speech last week, which aimed to strike a balance between growing the economy and supporting the vulnerable. In his weekly letter, Ramaphosa says this budget takes the country further along the path of reviving the economy and building its institutions in 3 ways. Cathy Mohlahlana takes a look.
President Cyril Ramaphosa explains that the 2024 budget shows the country is staying the course in its commitment to achieve a sustainable fiscal trajectory. 2, the budget protects critical services and social spending. Lastly, the budget includes new measures to support growth and create jobs while building infrastructure. Cathy Mohlahlana, SABC News, Johannesburg.
And the International Court of Justice will today host the final hearings in a case looking at the legal consequences arising from Israel's occupation of Palestinian territories. The UN General Assembly asked the UN's highest judicial body to provide an advisory opinion. The AU and the League of Arab States will be among those presenting their analysis to the judges. The BBC's Anna Holligan reports.
The African Union and the League of Arab States will be among those presenting their analysis to the judges today. During the course of last week, the World Court, as it's often known, heard a range of views. The most critical came from the Palestinian delegation and its allies. They argued Israel's occupation was tantamount to apartheid and constituted a violation of the Palestinian people's right to self-determination. Israel did not take part in the hearings but did submit a statement in which it said an advisory opinion would be harmful to attempts to resolve the ongoing conflict. The outcome of these hearings is expected within 6 months.
The top story this hour: investigations are underway following the shooting death of a resident of Sanford in Phoenix in the north of Durban. For SAFM News, Kemudupi Makhalemele.
Here, there, and everywhere. SAFM 105 FM in Mokopane. If you're active on social media and love SAFM, we hope you'll take a moment to like or follow our SAFM page on Facebook and Twitter. These are the best places to find all the guest information, conversations, and stories you love from your favorite presenters, along with regular updates from SABC News. And don't forget, you can send your questions to feedback@safm.co.za. SAFM, leading the conversation. The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
Hi, Cathy. How nauseating and disgusting to hear the president talking about NHI that is going to work for the nation, and also Minister of Finance also supporting that, giving us a mega allocation on NHI, whilst he failed dramatically or dismally on those 300 and something doctors who are not working, you see. Then how come you made those stupid promises unfulfilled, so to speak? It's really nauseating issue. Thank you.
Morning, Sis Cathy, and your guest. Sis Cathy, you see, Department of Health is a serious problem in South Africa. Like here in Northwest, one person can receive 2 salaries because of overtime, because of there is shortage of staff, and the corruption here, it is very high. There is no facilities here in Northwest. And other issue, this thing of National Treasury to cut the budget of Department of Health. You are the one who come into the hospital. Even now I'm in hospital, we are struggling because of shortage of staff. We are struggling. The thing, I don't know. There is no ambulance call. Everything is collapsing every day. And there is no accountability, something normal, especially under President Ramaphosa, especially in Metro South.
Cathy, I've got a concern because the Western Cape hospital service isn't perfect. The system isn't perfect either. My mother died, and I think if she got immediate attention, she might not have died within a 6-hour period. Because at the end of the day, Cathy, she was rushed at 5 o'clock in the morning to the hospital by my brother. And he told them that she can't breathe. She's struggling to breathe. At the hospital, Lentegee Hospital in Mitchells Plain. And he pushed her in a wheelchair, and he sat there, and when he panicked again when she struggled to breathe, and he stood in the middle of that hospital foyer and asked at the reception section, what would it take for somebody to assist my mother? And they told him to calm down. And he said, but I am calm, but I need help for my mother. Then only they took her, attended to her, Cathy. They sent her to the bathroom to go and help herself, without anybody watching over her, while my brother was getting the folder, and she collapsed in that bathroom. So I don't want to say anything further, but yeah.
Good day. I'm Madidaba Wasichaba, and these are your top stories. Reports state that SAMA award-winning, platinum-selling artist Vusi Nova is planning to get his leg back and tell his side of the story. After years of getting vilified by the media and becoming a victim of cancel culture, the star is ready to show the world who he is beyond the name and the fame, proving why Angeke Baskone as Mzansi gets to see him unapologetic, uncut and unprovoked. For more on this, catch Vusi Nova Unprovoked starting on the 2nd of March on SABC1. I'm Madidaba Wasichaba.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
All right, 12 after 11 o'clock. Welcome to the third and final hour of the show. Yeah, I think regardless of what exists on paper about interventions, about budget allocations, ultimately a huge part of what we think about the healthcare system will always come down to our individual experiences when we go to a clinic, when we go to a health facility. And for as long as people feel that when they go to access services, they simply aren't met with the level of care that they would expect, then it just means that there's still so much work that needs to be done. And it's really sad to hear some of the experiences that some of you were sharing in those WhatsApp voice notes. And thank you for sharing them, because I think it shows just the extent of the breakdown that exists and what it is that needs to be fixed. Our final conversation for this morning is looking at community development practitioners and the importance, of course, community development practitioners. This is a sector which often, I think, goes unnoticed. They do thankless work in communities. You'll find them mostly in your township areas, in your rural areas, and providing services that in many ways are strengthening the work that government is supposed to be doing. Sometimes these community practitioners are operating under NGOs. Sometimes they're not even under any formal structure. It's just good Samaritans in communities that see a gap and that, step in to meet that gap. Well, how do we professionalize the sector is the conversation that we're having this morning. Let me welcome onto the show Lydia Maredi, who is a Community Development Policy Manager in the Department of Social Development. Lydia, good morning to you.
Good morning, Cathy, and thank you for the opportunity.
Mponcheng Gumede is also a community development policy manager in the Department of Social Development. Mponcheng, good morning. We also have joining us on the line Bagedi Mutubatse, who's an executive manager for education and training quality assurance at the Health and Welfare SETA. Bagedi, good morning.
Good morning, Cathy. Thanks for having me on the show.
Lydia, let's talk about community development practitioners. When you say it this way, it sounds really fancy, but of course, this is not a fancy job at all. These are the people who are willing to get their hands dirty and provide services in a community. What's the kind of work that community development practitioners do?
Thank you for the question, Cathy. Just to say that community development practitioners, as we've indicated, they are spread across the country. So we've got practitioners who are in government. We also have practitioners who are in civil society organizations, the NGOs that you have mentioned. We also have practitioners who are in private sector organizations. So they are spread like that. But back to your question, in terms of the work that they do various programs. They assist communities in any need that the community might have. But in terms of the programs, we've got a program that we call community mobilization, where we are profiling the community. In that profiles, we need to know the structure of the community, who are in the community, who, in terms of the community structures and all of that. And then we also have another program that is Sustainable Livelihood Program, where we do interventions like skills development, socio-economic interventions, as well as partnerships with the community in terms of the cooperatives, the self-help groups. So we do a lot of socio-economic interventions, as I've mentioned. We also have a youth development program. Also in the youth development program, we do programs like skills development as well, focusing now only on young people. So it could be young people with disabilities, it could be ordinary young people, and we support them and we empower them in terms of what they should be doing. We also do mentoring and coaching programs for young people so that they are able to establish their own forums in the community, and so that they are able to support one another. So that is largely what community development practitioners are all about.
And how do we distinguish between somebody who's doing volunteer work and somebody who is in government? Because you say that you have community development practitioners who are in government, in the private sector, in NGOs, and yet sometimes a huge chunk of these individuals are also depending on relying on a grant that they could potentially qualify for, including grants from the Department of Social Development. So how do you, as a department, define who then is this practitioner that at least might be able to come and get some kind of funding from you for the work that they are doing?
Remember, in terms of that, we've got NPOs, non-profit organizations. So if you require funding from us as a department, you need to do your business plan for your non-profit organization. So you will then register the non-profit organization with the department, and then that registration, you will then receive a registration certificate. The registration certificate will then allow you to be able to mobilize for any resources that you will require for your NPO. You can mobilize the resources from government, but you can also mobilize the resources from private sector organizations.
All right. Mponteng, why the need to professionalize this work? And when we say that it's being professionalized, what do we really mean?
Thank you, Cathy. By professionalization, we mean we want the sector to be recognized. Just now you spoke about community development practitioners who are not even known. But through professionalization, they will be recognized. It will help them to get recognition, and there will be a professional body that will be taking care of their regulations and also ensure that their ethics, the communities are not taken advantage of. That's accountability part of it. But also the professional board will also be responsible for the education and training of the community development practitioners. They will work together with all the training providers, including the higher education institutions. Yes.
Bakedi, let me bring you into the conversation. What really then is the benefit of professionalizing the sector? Which again, when you look at what it is that community development practitioners do, can vary depending on the field they're in, depending on sometimes what it is that they're being funded to do. So how do you as a CETA come in and say, well, this is how we're going to recognize, the learning for such a profession?
From the CETA side, KP, we are responsible as per the NQF Act. We are responsible to ensure that there is seamless movement on the NQF. Whether a person has acquired their learning through a university or private institution, they can move up the NQF. Now, your question on professionalization, we are on the supply side. We ensure that we have providers that are accredited to offer this accredited training, and also to ensure that there is quality training that is happening in the sector. Just to talk to what Mponteng has said right now, the whole concept of professionalization will therefore start with a quality training that has taken place, being offered by accredited providers that we have on our database, that we are sure that after the learner has gone through the training, they are ready to be professionalized. Just to also indicate that we have registration with the council as well. So if the learner has gone through professional training and quality training, they are ready at an auxiliary level to register with the council so that they stand to also qualify as professional practitioners. So we play a role in a sense of saying we will supply from our side quality training offered by our accredited providers so that we assist the department to get all the skills that they want for this cadre to be registered and also to be professionalized.
What is the benefit of being registered? What is the benefit of having, this learning recognized, as you've all put it this morning?
The benefit is that you will have the required skills. Remember, our training is outcome-based. So you will have the required skills that the department will need in order for you to be professionalized. Without being registered with us to get the quality training that you need, obviously you won't get to the outcome that you need to be a professional community development practitioner.
So let me come back to the studio and ask, what does the training then entail? Again, because so many people are doing different things in communities, what is recognized? So if I'm a young person and I'm doing all sorts of volunteer work in my community and I want to be recognized, I want this to be a skill that is officially recognized, what is it that you're going to be looking at to say, actually, you can be part of the program, or we can recognize the skill based on what? Lydia?
Thank you for the question, Cathy. Just to say that in terms of the recognition of prior learning, we started with the social development practitioners. So we started with the auxiliary level, like Jane has indicated, and in the 7 provinces that we had practitioners. So what the program aimed to do was to recognize the learning and the experience that the practitioners have been on the ground for many years, some of them for 10 or more years on the ground doing the work, but they did not have a certificate that will recognize the work that they've been doing or that will recognize the experience. So through the RPL process, as we know it, we call it RPL, but it's recognition of prior learning. We have recognized those practitioners, and those who have succeeded, they have received a certificate, NQF level 5 certificate, which is at an auxiliary level. These are actually what we call, in our language, we call them assistant community development practitioners. They are at an auxiliary level, but like my colleagues have indicated, the certificate will enable them as well. When we are fully professionalized, the certificate will enable them to register with the council as auxiliary practitioners. So, but the program has started in the department. Currently, about 581 learners have successfully completed the program, and they have graduated. The last graduation that we had was last week in the Western Cape, where we were recognizing and the learners, and they have received the certificates that my colleagues were talking about.
All right. Mponseng, I'm going to ask you to try and break it down for me. Even this recognition of prior learning, if I've been practicing as a journalist and I want an institution to recognize prior learning, that means that there's something I must bring to the table, right? I must say, no, I've been working in the newsroom, I've been reporting stories, etc., etc. So this is my evidence to support why I deserve to receive, whether it's a degree, a junior degree, whatever, as prior learning. How does it work with community development practitioners? What is it that they need to show? That this prior learning, what is it that is the prior learning?
Thanks, Cathy. Like Lydia has indicated, we focused on the personnel that were in the department. And through the health and facilitator support, we have a memorandum of understanding. We've got 3 qualifications actually that have been developed specifically for community development to address the challenges where we would find that someone would say, I'm a community development practitioner, but when you look at the content of their qualification, it was different. So we started there with South African qualifications, South African Qualifications Authority, where we developed the qualifications NQF level 4, NQF level 5, and NQF level 8. So what we did then for this RPL, we embarked on the process with the provinces to say, we need people who at least have been working for not less than 3 years. Yes, that was a requirement. But then through the service provider that was appointed by Health and Welfare Sector, they would have to submit portfolio of evidence. It was an 18-month process when we started with the pilot. They had to fill in to say, if you say you can do profiling, give us proof. So they would have to submit proof that they've done profiling. If it's about, I've engaged with the stakeholders, I know how to engage stakeholders, or I've facilitated meetings, then they have to submit that portfolio of evidence. Most of them are complaining that the ones who have just qualified that they were given 1 blue file, but at the end they would have to submit about 3 files. And where there was a gap, specifically for issues that the department was not offering, Health and Welfare Sector came on board and offered top-up training on those specific unit standards to ensure that at the end, all that qualified got the credits.
So as a starting point, then the people that have mostly sort of received this recognition of prior learning are those that are employed by the department.
Yes.
Okay, so it's not people that are out there in the community that are doing work, because I would imagine, because they're department employees, are they mostly social workers or they're doing different kind of work? Explain it to me, please.
Okay, maybe I can also indicate that we've got social service practitioners and community development practitioners is one of those, and social workers and child and youth care workers.
Okay.
So this is the third. And when even in the council right now we've got 2 boards, but the third one for community development will be coming. So the community development practitioners were employed to deal with the socio-economic challenges in the department, but then those resulted in challenges within the department, because when you look at the skills, these people were not able, hence the interventions, where we've got various interventions like training of CDPs, but then recognition of prior learning was one of those, and development of the qualifications was one of those, of addressing those challenges that were picked up to say we've got personnel, but because of the knowledge and skills that they are not able to address the challenges.
We'll continue the conversation in a moment. Professionalizing then the work that is being done by community development practitioners is the conversation that we're having this morning. It's 11:30, time for the latest news headlines.
And in the headlines, a suspected criminal has been killed and 2 others injured during a mob justice incident in Burgersfort in Limpopo. Police say community members had rounded off 3 people suspected of a series of crimes such as robberies in the area. In other news, investigations are underway following a fatal shooting of a resident of Sanford in Phoenix in the north of Durban. 52-year-old Mohammed Abid Adam was shot dead in an alleged drive-by shooting on Friday. And authorities continue to search for 6-year-old Jocelyn Smith from Saldanha Bay on the Cape West Coast, who went missing a week ago. The little girl's mother reported her missing after returning from work and couldn't find her. Details on these and other stories at the top of the hour.
The Talking Point with Cathy Mohlahlana. Weekdays, 9 a.m. till midday.
All right, we continue the conversation on the Talking Point this morning. We're talking about the work that is being done to try and professionalize the work that that exists in the communities, mostly being done by community development practitioners. We're joined by Lydia Maredi and Mponteng Gumede, who are both community development policy managers in the Department of Social Development, and Bagedi Mutubadze, who's the executive manager for education and training quality assurance at the Health and Welfare SETA. So, Bagedi, let me bring this conversation back to you then. Post being able to give and recognize this learning for the individuals that are in the Department of Social Development, and this qualification now being offered by the SETA, does it mean it's open to the public?
Kathy, yes, it means it is open to the public. We had qualifications expiring on the 30th of June 2023. So we had unit standard-based qualifications that expired, and they were replaced by occupational qualifications. So we are happy to say that the community development qualification has been developed by our other SETA called ETDP SETA. We have it on NQF level 4 and NQF level 5. But key to the auxiliary worker on that auxiliary level, as my colleagues have indicated, we have identified that there are two ways that these practitioners can get a certificate. Through RPL, recognition of prior learning, like they have indicated, that the department and HWCTA worked on to come to a pilot and rolling it out in various provinces. People who were not aware that they can get a certificate through the recognition of prior learning were then invited to come on board. And those that are still out there that have got skills in their occupation, they gain skills through experience, they can still approach the department so that we can offer the recognition of prior learning to them to get a certificate. But another way of getting a certificate will be through a learnership. So I was talking to my fellow colleagues here to say, through our learnerships, can we also add community development so that we can have all these employees on an auxiliary level to be able to register with the council and practice, and then after that move into the professionalization of their occupation at NQF level 8, which obviously my colleagues Lydia and Ponteng will allude to, because there is a career pathway at the moment that we are preparing them for, so that they can get the level 8, NQF level 8, for them to be professionalized. That is where we are going right now, and we really want the community practitioners, development practitioners, to take advantage of these opportunities and ensure that they are recognized for the skill that they have gained throughout the years.
So, if I'm understanding you, Bagedi, anybody who does work in the community can come forward and see if whatever they've been doing will form part of what you then are officially recognizing, and if not, you can of course then advise them accordingly.
The HWCTA has got an RPL policy that indicates that you need to have 3 years and more experience for you to come through. So yes, anybody that is out there and they have been practicing, there are some that have been practicing for 10, 20 years, but they don't have a certificate to show for what they know. So they can approach their provincial office and indicate that they will want to go for RPL, and I believe that the department won't turn them away. They will definitely consider them when we roll out, because from the HWCTA side, we do have a budget, an annual budget, to ensure that we get people to come on board and be recognized through RPL.
Let me go to Mzwandile, who's out in Gqeberha. Mzwandile, good morning.
Hi, Cathy.
Yes.
Yeah, look, I can tell you're having utmost difficulty tracking the information from the panelists there. Yeah, do you know what we need? Fortunately, I happen to work in rural areas. What we need is, one, we need mass training of community practitioners from scratch. So that is to say, because actually, if you're hearing what your panelists are saying there, practitioners really are like extension officers on behalf of the state, for lack of a better word. So it's people who would have assessed the needs of a community and aligned them for intervention. So what I'm saying is, what we actually need is them who are trainers of development practitioners to train them on a mass scale. Firstly, to do that, you would have assessed where are the gaps within the community between the state and the community, and then train people in those areas. Now, what I think the benefit of that would be is you would stop having politicization of people who have a skill. And by that I mean, for instance, if Mzwandile happens to be a volunteer community practitioner, what generally happens is when a politician will come there, recognize that skill, and then adopt me politically, and then you start with political divisions within the community. Whereas I feel what they are bringing your panelists is quite good, but it has not been brought to the community on a mass scale that is standardized and reinforced continuously. And that starts by first assessing what are the actual needs of the community, where a gap is existing between what the state is providing and what the community is needing. Let me make a practical example. Mother was a nurse in a town called Venterstad. When she arrived there were only two nurses. It was her and a white nurse. This goes back in the early 90s. My mother recognized that, you know what, the work that is needed here needs a lot more nurses than what they can provide and cope. The state is not making that intervention. She went and sourced community volunteers whom she could train to become almost like an extension of the health work system. There was about 8 or 10 of them, or 15. And over time, with intervention, the proper training, those people later on became adopted as part of the service providers or practitioners within the health system. They are now on the database, on paid roll, and at the moment they are earning a stipend on income through the health system. So what I'm saying is that is what is needed, is an actual recognition of what are the needs of communities and in which areas could people be trained, and by providing such training, you are able then to professionalize the people. But the way I'm hearing from the panelists, it's like they want to professionalize those who are already volunteering, but that might be a minute number of people versus the actual needs of the people.
Mzwandile, thank you so much for that call. I think you've really helped to clarify part of what is happening in the sector. I understand it a lot better following the examples that you've given. So thanks for that, Mzwandile.
Okay.
All right, Mzwandile is out in Gqeberha and is working in the space. I've got somebody else here who's sent through a message, but I don't know if this is a legitimate question. A listener says, Hi Cathy, I hold a Master of Business Administration with a focus on corporate social responsibility and NGO management through a university in Germany. I have years of community development work. What would the process be for my case if I wanted to be recognized? What would this individual have to do? And given the fact that he already holds a master's in this field, does he need a certificate like this? Would it still benefit him to have it added to his qualifications? I don't know who wants to answer. Okay, Mpontseng, you can go for it.
Okay. We started the process of engaging the community some years back with the South African Council of Social Service Practitioners. The South African Council of Social Service Practitioners already has a database right now of people who will be allowed to nominate and also to elect people who are going to be in the board. The board is the one that is going to regulate the sector. But we also have requested the council to say they need to open up that database again And as we are speaking, we've got the regulations that are going to be gazetted soon as the Minister of Social Development approves those regulations. Then the process of professionalization will start. But to ensure that everyone else is allowed into the process, then the council will open up for people to register so that they can nominate. The board is the one that is going to come back to the sector and draft the regulations and saying who is going to be accepted to be registered, either as an auxiliary community development practitioner or as a professional community development practitioner.
All right, thanks for that. Bakedi, perhaps let me get your final word on this conversation.
My final word is that there will be those practitioners that will want to go for training on their own and pay for their fees to get this community development qualification. There are providers out there that take our learners for granted, and they take their money and disappear. So we want to just alert these learners to be aware of them, and for them to register with these institutions, they must firstly be sure that these practitioners are accredited with the CETA. They can call our number 011 607 6900, 011 607 6900, or 7002. And our email address to check whether a provider is accredited or not is awceta@awceta.org.za. awceta@awceta.org.za. And a provider that claims that they are accredited must show you a letter of accreditation that is signed by myself, and that will show that they are definitely accredited with the HWCETA, and it must reflect community development on that certificate. If it doesn't, then they are not accredited.
Thank you so much for that, Bakedi. Lydia, let me close it off with you very briefly, please.
Yes, just to say, in responding to Mzwandile's question and the lady who's got the masters, as we said, the online registration from the council will be reopened very soon, and we will be making a call for all those practitioners who've got qualifications and those who do not to register on the database, so that when we are professionalizing, they should be part. And I agree with Mzwandile to say that this program is very massive, the community development program. So we need to reach out to all the people who are out there who wants to be part of the program, and they must also play part in the program. Just also to say that in closing, Cathy, we have developed a policy that will regulate how all these practitioners should be working on the ground. Remember now, they are working without a policy, and as we said, we have not yet professionalized them. So there's a lot that is happening in the sector. So the national policy will be approved by cabinet, so that we know exactly what these practitioners are doing on the ground, but also so that we know who are these practitioners that are on the ground. Because currently, Mzwandile is right, currently we don't know. We only know those that are on our database and those that are primarily employed by government. So we are doing a database so that we know who's in the sector and what kind of qualifications or skills do they have.
All right. Let me thank you all for coming onto the show today. Lydia Maredi and Mponseng Gumede, who are both of the Department of Social Development as Community Development Policy Managers, and Bagedi Mutubatse, who's with the Health and Welfare CETA. That's where we leave it for this morning. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We're back with you again tomorrow. For now, I leave you with the book reading.
You will never walk alone.
Oh, yeah, I fully concur. Your screen is more than marvelous with Liverpool FC TV, where you can catch highlights of both women and men's teams from the junior stars to the elite level. Conversations with the playing personnel and mentors, including the latest updates about this massive football brand.
The Reds! Witness Liverpool FC TV on your home of sporting excellence.
Your front seat awaits you every Monday at 9 p.m. live on SABC Sport on DTT Channel 4. Also available on SABC Plus catch-up service and SABCSport.com.
Proudly brought to you by SABC Sport. For the love of the game.
The Free State Provincial Government, under the leadership of Premier Mxolisi Dukwana, will host the much-anticipated Free State Investment Conference. The conference seeks to promote the province as an investment destination through showcasing strategic investment projects. Do join us on the 27th of February 2024 at the University of the Free State's main campus in Bloemfontein. The Free State Provincial Government, harnessing partnerships, stimulating growth and development through investment.
Hashtag SAFM Talking Point.
The book reading. Please note the views expressed in this book are not that of the station. Listeners' discretion is advised. SFM presents another episode of Why Men Hate Women, written by Kopano Ratile.
In trying to understand Khasha Matoti's play and what she thought about men's violence against women, I would find occasion to put the question to her, given that she had written a play about it. What did she think would cause some women to love the men who hate them? The interaction and many others contributed to the accumulation of notes I have made about men, women, love and violence that has resulted in my attempts in this book to unscramble the puzzle of love and violence. But what I could not get help with was the parallel question, which can be seen as the flip side. Why do men hate those they claim to love? With this question in mind then, and considering it alongside the question of why women love men who violate them, I became increasingly persuaded of the need to consider the puzzle of why there is violence or its threat where one might expect only acts of words of love. The issue of violence in close relationships, which researchers of violence and gender have grappled with from various angles, is an important concern for me. It is significant from my point of view as a masculinity scholar, but also as a man who came around to seeing the work of the love of women in my own life as a son, a husband, co-parent, friend, and colleague. Several answers can be given to the question of why men hate those close to them surely. This may be due to the fact that the question overlaps with other questions, is intertwined with other facts about relationships. An answer that has become common in contemporary life is conveyed in the discourse of toxic masculinity. The term has gained currency among women in our country as it has among women in other parts of the world when they try to explain men's violence, controlling behavior, sexism, and misogyny. However, we must take care when using terms and their definitions. It is true that over a decade and a half ago, South African masculinity scholar Robert Morrell signaled the issue of toxic masculinity in a study on fathers when asked how fatherhood can be conceived as part of a broader project to enhance the development of non-toxic masculinities. It is not always clear what toxic masculinity refers to when it is used. Is it all bad things done by males? Does it refer to what bad males are or to traits in men? Is it the same thing as patriarchal or violent or dominant masculinity? Does it indicate a form of ideology or attitude? Given the fact of female masculinity, which indicates that masculinity exists even without men, and which therefore implies that what is called toxic masculinity can be enacted by females and gender non-conforming people and not only by men, why are we wont to conflate masculinity with biological maleness? And why do we tend to organize against gender oppression and violence in binary gender terms of male-born people and female-born people? Female masculinity, which reaches beyond lesbian masculinity, beyond bodies and sexual orientation, signals that masculinity should not be used as a synonym for people with male genitalia or male-like bodies or who look like they are men. The simple fact is that in any society, masculinity is shaped, constructed, and practiced by possibly all the people and institutions in the society at one or another point in time. Some writers seem to understand dominant masculinity, traditional masculinity, and toxic masculinity as the same thing, describing such masculinity as based on simplified norms and understandings of traditionally masculine characteristics such as violence, physical strength, suppression of emotion, and devaluation of women. Toxic masculinity is then essentially a term to indicate censure of some men's behavior. This implies that it has nothing to say about structures of power. And power is the key to any understanding of gender relations. While it may offer a ready handle to speak of the reprehensible things men do or the views they hold, toxic masculinity as a concept is inadequate when it comes to offering us a good grasp of masculinity itself. It also does not get us far in trying to understand the causes of men's violence. It is also interesting that the term toxic masculinity was coined within the mythopoetic men's movement. In other words, good men in subtly anti-feminist men's groups who believe in the subordination of women coined the term to dissociate themselves from bad men. The term then took off outside these conservative men's groups in wider public exchanges about masculinity around the world and in other exchanges relating to policy and therapy. In my reading, toxic masculinity is another trope that typologizes masculinity. That is, instead of offering analysis of what men do that hurts women and other men, and more importantly, why men hurt others, it places men in one of two categories, toxic and non-toxic. Neither masculinity as part of societal structures nor men's agencies receives any attention in this typology. And as contended by Andrea Whaling, who offers one of the coherent analysis of toxic masculinity, the term emerged through misinterpretations of Connell's work on toxic practices of masculinity in peripheral fields such as in health and criminology, among others. While some feminists have embraced the term and attributed men's violence as well as many other unfavorable things men do to toxic masculinity, some researchers have maintained that it is ill-advised to adopt toxic masculinity as an analytical concept. This is not only because the term individualizes responsibility for gender inequalities to certain bad men, but also because, paradoxically, it perpetuates within and cross-gender hierarchies. The language of toxic masculinity therefore offers little true understanding and no strategy I know of to transform gender relations or men. And it does not seem to have a plan for how to shift the nature of masculinity from toxicity toward its opposites, among which I presume will be non-violence, anti-racism, integrity, environmentalism, vulnerability, anti-sexism, kindness, Ubuntu, and of course love. Furthermore, and worryingly, the discourse of toxic masculinity easily tips over into regarding all that is masculine as toxic. It is worthwhile to recognize that while male violence is used to assert male control over females, it is also possible to have a society in which the domination of males is everywhere evident, yet the levels of direct violence are low. Call this soft domination. If men's violence against women emanates from the fact that social arrangements enable men to have social power over women, then the answer to the question of why men hate those they love cannot simply be toxic masculinity. In fact, you may not need any toxic masculinity, just a society where men and women are allocated different positions. In such a society, the unspoken rule is that a woman must follow the rules set by men, and then they will not be hurt. It is when women refuse to follow these rules that violence ensues. Rules point to an answer that has a much longer and more tested track record in explaining men's violence: patriarchy. Very simple stated, patriarchy refers to the rule of families, communities, and societies by fathers or older men. Patriarchy is essentially about gender structures. Men in patriarchal terms have a right to rule over women because the world is ordered in that way, and patriarchal dominance is enforced through various forms: violence, overt and subtle. While it offers a persuasive framework for analyzing men's love in relation to power, simply uttering the word patriarchy is not the same thing as unpacking why men hate women. There are certainly complicated dynamics involved in why individuals hate the people they say they love, and it seems to me that if we are to develop our understanding of this, we ought to slow down and probe these dynamics. There is a set of related questions that I find at times I hold back from asking, because it can be misinterpreted, and which points to a different set of reasons why men hate women. Namely, can there be affection in a place like this, where we have been through so much with a historical trauma such as ours? Does not the saturation of our society in a history of violence and its persistence in the demographic dispensation mean that cruel treatment of each other will leak into our psyches and close relations, even when we want to be loved and to love? Stating that men hate women they love because of patriarchy is not untrue, but it is not the complete picture, and more importantly, it does not show us how it is that some men resist this way of relating to women. That is, why not all men in patriarchal societies hate women. At the same time, contending that the upstream causes of men's violence against women are to be found in the historical and contemporary socio-political architecture of our society is also not untrue. But that too is not the whole story, as not all men or their children who endured the humiliation of apartheid are violent. There is an intricate relationship between patriarchal power and racist power, and both do not stop at the level of institutions. They get internalized, but there is also resistance. The answer I wish to advance can be found in one word: contradiction. Contradiction is not unusual in psychological and social life, in affective life as well as within structures. An individual can oppose him or herself. A social structure can contain contradictions. The capability to recognize contradictions in our psychologies and social conditions, and where necessary to live productively with them, is essential if we are to grasp love in a violent world. More vitally, this capacity is indispensable in understanding and living with ourselves in this society.
That was another episode of Why Men Hate Women and Other Reflections on Love, Violence and Masculinity, read by Samson Khumalo. The book is published by Wits University Press and is also available online, www.wetspress.co.za. It is broadcast on SAFM at 11:45 Monday to Thursday on The Talking Point. It is produced for SAFM by Jeffrey Matenji. Technical production by Wiseman Manqele.
Just after 12 on Monday, the 26th of February 2024. Very warm welcome to Updated Noon here on SAFM. Leading the conversation for the next hour, I'm Sakina Kamwendo. Coming up on today's show,
we are going in the right direction. Ultimately, we want to get to a situation where I'm able to stand before the public and say, we have not experienced any hours of load shedding.
Electricity Minister Dr. Hosiense Ramokgopa says that they will continue to work very hard to resolve the challenge of load shedding, and the IEC is expected to brief the media shortly on the state of readiness for the upcoming 2024 general elections. John Herrick is here, coming up in sport.
I don't want to cut my chickens, but Banyana will find out who their matches against to qualify for the Olympic Games, and for no reason, we're going to hear from the Kaizer Chiefs coach.
Count your chickens. We could miss the Kaizer Chiefs coach, but hey. John Chirika with more on that later on in the show. Please share your views with us. 41391 is the SMS line number. It's charged R150 per SMS. You can also write to us via X or Facebook. Our handle at SABC News_radio. You can also reach us via X, on X, using the hashtag Updated Noon, or send us a WhatsApp voice note on 0826923909. All these and more stories coming up on this Monday edition of Updated Noon. First, though, is the latest news with Modupi Mohlahlana.
SABC News, independent and impartial.
Top stories this hour. Mob justice ends in death in Begersfort, and Israel presents a plan to evacuate Rafah. Good day. A suspected criminal has been killed while 2 others escaped with injuries during a mob justice incident in Begersfort in Limpopo. The injured have been taken to a hospital. Police say community members had rounded off 3 people suspected of a series of crimes such as robberies in the area. Police spokesperson Malesela Lidwaba says the victim died on arrival at a hospital. He has been identified as Lovemore Magabe. Investigations are continuing. Meanwhile, investigations are underway following the fatal shooting of a